remains with Westminster, where the UK Labour majority voted in favour of it. So there's a functional point. We don't have the power to change at the moment. We have to have that power if we want to do it, and do it with every question we want. There are some times when Westminster passes laws and makes initiatives that I support. But if you want every single time to do what you want in terms of international policy, you have to have the power to do so. That's a functional point. In terms of your second point, well, sometimes Gordon Brown or somebody else in the European Union does what we want. Isn't that a good thing? That's fine until he does something that you don't want. And I'll give you a very good example. Of that. The fishing industry in Scotland is quite a significant part of our national economy, still is. It's 10 times more important to the Scottish economy than it is to the UK economy. And it's a point that the SNP has been raising within a European Union context since the Convention on the Future of Europe, which then came up with the draft constitution and has now come back in the form of the EU Reform Treaty. And from the very start, we played our part as a party, saying the way that this policy is being run within the EU is a disaster, and it needs to be changed, and it most certainly does not need to be enshrined in a constitution or in the EU Reform Treaty as an exclusive competence. We did that within the convention. We did it in private talks with UK Labour ministers, and those talks have continued. And at no point has that issue been taken seriously because it's not important for the UK. It is utterly peripheral from a UK point of view. So I'm giving a very specific policy example of where the interests of Scotland are being overlooked. And even if Gordon Brown happens to be born in Scotland and is sitting at the Council of Ministers, doesn't mean that he's going to argue in favour of the country's national interest.
If I may follow up, though, I mean, my question is more, though, that essentially issues like Trident and even the question of being an honest broker in the world, certainly, which is an important one, those are issues that at least now pertain to the UK as a whole, and I don't understand why they need to be viewed as a Scotland versus England or versus UK issue. I don't understand why you can't sort of resolve them as a UK-wide issue or as a regional issue, as you said, for example, fisheries with local constituencies.
Okay. Well, the first thing is it's not a Scottish versus a UK thing. It's not. It's a choice that we have. We can pursue it because it is the way we want to do it. Nobody that I'm aware of in London is saying that Scotland can't host peace and reconciliation talks. And that's why I was keen to support the discussions that took place in 2003. But if you want to really make something out of that, you need the effective use of a diplomatic service, of your direct links with different countries in the world, which is something that Scotland doesn't have at the moment. This is not a role that the UK is pursuing. The UK's role in the international community is very different. It's a sort of post-imperial, still a major player in the world role that both the Labour Party and the Conservative Party try to pursue. I don't think with tremendous success often, but that's the role that they pursue. I see another role for Scotland, and that is to be known for supporting the likes of peace and reconciliation efforts. I actually find it quite ironic if you think about the role that UK Prime Ministers, and it's about the only thing that I'll praise Tony Blair for, the role that he played in Northern Ireland. It's passing strange that one wouldn't use all that experience of actually a good development and try, but that's up for them to do, but they haven't done that, which underlines the point that I'm making. The UK is not even prepared to do that for itself. Scotland, if it wants to do that, will have to do it itself.
Sorry, James.
All right. Looking more domestically, say if you do have a referendum and the people say no to independence, what would happen then? Would you come back a year later and offer another referendum, or would there be a 10-year wait, 20-year wait?
Well, there's a very important democratic safeguard in that well, first I would hope we win the first referendum. You never go into an election with a referendum campaign anticipating defeat. So first off, I'm pretty confident that we would win. But we would then ask people again if we had a mandate to do it.
So you just wait for the next election, you put it.
You wait until you have a mandate. If the people want the question to be put, they'll put you in. And you will have the mandate of the people in an election to do so. And that's the way it should be. My goodness, this means an interesting constitutional point. But if you think about how difficult these issues can be in other parts of the world, they're vexed. They're often bloody. No voices being raised. We're arguing the pros and cons of whether it's a good thing or not. I think that's tremendous. That's why I get invited to things by the British Council and various other things to talk about this experience of what's going on in Scotland, because it is actually quite rare. So I don't anticipate defeat, but if we don't win the first time, we will give the people the opportunity to have their view when they want to do that. It's a democratic thing. I would inject into the crystal ball the certainty that if there is a referendum in Scotland, we'll have three options. It's not going to be analog, black and white. It's going to be the status quo, it's going to be more powers to the Scottish Parliament, and it's going to be independence. Because what you have is the three UK parties who now realise that electorally they're going to have to come up with a plan of devolution max. So probably the Scottish Parliament with additional powers over taxation, over broadcasting and a host of other things. And that will be bundled together, and that will probably be the second option, and independence will be the third. I'm confident both would be yes to both. But it would be a democratic question. People would have their say, and that's the way to do it. It's the best way to do it.
Ollie?
Can I ask a question about the European Union and
Yes.
Scotland's relationship? In the event of Scotland becoming an independent country, you have a pretty fundamental disagreement with EU policy in relation to fisheries. And I was wondering, if you're in the position of going into negotiation, you obviously have your plan A, which is that you're successful, but you also have to have a plan B if you're not successful, and bearing in mind that at that time, if that were to ever happen, Scotland could be one of 30 or so countries
Sure.
in the European Union.
Sure.
If the rest of the EU is not prepared to change its position, where do you go from there? Do you continue to go to the European Union and accept the decisions people have taken in the past, or what do you do?
I mean, that's a question that every country faces. Is there a point at which the policy, the direction of the organisation, the treaty-based organisation that you're in, doesn't fulfil your expectations? Well, there is a clause in the new EU Reform Treaty that would allow member states to leave if they wanted to. I can't foresee a circumstance at the moment where I would be advocating that for Scotland. I look at a country like Norway, one of our closest neighbours, which is richer than us, which has a higher standard of living than we do, which has, under the UN quality of life statistics, a higher standard than pretty much anywhere else in Europe. They've decided that they're going to remain out, although, ironically, they pretty much have to integrate every single EU regulation directive into their national law, because it's part of the European Free Trade area. They're also part of Schengen. And it's up to the Norwegians to make their own decisions, but I don't think it would be advisable to have to continue integrating EU proposals into your domestic law and not actually taking part in the discussions to make sure it's optimal. And I suppose that is the answer to your question in the end, that sometimes there are things that you will not be happy with, but that you have to live with. The point is that unless you're there making the point, you're never going to change it. And what I find intriguing, I'm fortunate that I get to travel to quite a lot of sort of EU-related events, that when I'm raised with people, I mean, I take, for example, Sir John Kerr, who was the General Secretary of the Convention, and I said to him, do you really appreciate the realpolitik of what happened on the fisheries issue? And he said, what do you mean? I said, well, if there was a referendum in Scotland, I am pretty confident the majority of people in Scotland would vote against. And that's in a Scotland that 10, 15 years ago would have been one of the most traditionally pro-European parties.